Hi, everyone. So this is the first day of the introduction course for anime characters and bodies. So in this course, we are going to go through from head to foot anime style drawing. So what that means is that every week we're going to concentrate on a different portion of the body and we are going to draw that together. Start with the head and gradually move our way down. So this is a flexible course. So what does that mean? It means that you can stop and start at any time, which is a benefit. Maybe maybe you have to go do something. Maybe there's a little spot where you're having a little bit of a difficulty. Well, stop and start. Awesome thing about flexibility. But I do want this class to be interactive. So please leave your work in the classroom. Let's talk in discussions in the classroom. Let's do little fun scavenger hunts. And maybe at the end of the class, we can all share a character together with each other. You're going to work really hard in this class. So you should definitely reward yourself by allowing others to see your work. That also means that my email is always open. If you have any questions, you can send me a video or a photo of what you're working on, and I'll try to help you as best as I can. You can also leave it in the classroom as well. I'll try to leave some video chats in there as well. So let's get started with the class. So as I mentioned, this is a class about anime. We're going to be doing kind of like an in-between of anime and manga style. And it's just a matter of semantics, really. Anything that isn't animated is actually a manga. Manga is just a drawing. It's a comic. So we're not doing animation, we're doing drawings. So in the sense that we are doing manga, but we're also doing anime, it gets really confusing. So you might hear me say the words interchangeably. My style might be a little bit different than your style, and that's totally okay. I want you to take what you learn in this class and embrace it, but also twist it around to fit you and how you want to draw. So there's a lot of practice that goes into drawing, particularly all the time. The more that you practice, the better you get at it. That's generally how it is. But really quickly, I wanted to show you just what we're going to be working through in this course. We're going to start with the basics, just an anime, how we're going to draw that today. It's going to be a really simple head just to kind of get through the portions. Next week, we're going to do a girl, the following week, a boy, and then we're going to kind of gradually go down into our working with feet. And I thought that would be a kind of a fun way to just practice each individual piece of the body repetitively so that by the end, you'll draw quite a bit of heads, quite a bit of shoulders, quite a bit of upper body. If you have any question on the schedule, if you need any help with it, just let me know. And that is what we will be doing. So in this class, I do the minimum when it comes to what is needed, only because beginners, you may not necessarily have all the material. So I'll show you what I'm going to be using. In this class, I'm going to be using an eraser, and I have two types. I have a standard type of an eraser, and then I also have what I call a putty eraser. So the putty eraser is just a really fun eraser that you can stretch and turn. You can lighten up darker lines. You can also like make it really, really small in case you have something that you really want to erase, and it's just a little tiny mark. I'm also going to be using a mechanical pencil, and this is just to kind of keep my lines pretty fine. When I'm shading, you're going to probably see me use like a number 2 basic pencil. And this is just because I get more range with this, but I get more of the fine tuning of drawing with a very sharp point. It's really hard unless you're using a specific type of sketching to use really sharp lines. So we're going to kind of go interchangeably between the two. That's really it. Again, if you only have your number 2 or you only have a mechanical, you should be okay, but I would recommend at least having a number 2 pencil and not the mechanical, because the number 2 has a little bit more range. You can always sharpen your pencil if you need to get a really small details into your drawing. I also am going to be using a stomp. Stomps are awesome. They are used to kind of smudge in your existing pigment. Maybe you want to add a really light shade to your drawing, and this is a great way to do it. It also can act as its own pigment once you get it pretty dirty. So we're going to be using that as well. Make sure you have a piece of paper, because I'm sure that your guardian or whoever's taking care of you will not like that you draw on their desk or on their floor or on their wall. So I would recommend having pieces of paper, even better, a sketchbook, because then you can kind of go back and forth to see what you did, how you were, versus now as you look through your book. In the class, I'm going to be leaving videos, most likely on Thursdays. I'll try to get them out to you. I will also be leaving what I draw in the class as a companion to the video so that you could kind of use it as a reference point. So as you're looking at the video, you can kind of know what the next step is going to be, also as a guideline. When you're drawing, I want you to really be yourself. The only expectation that I want you to do is to push yourself a little bit further by practicing asking questions, feeling a little uncomfortable, because within that uncomfortableness, there's going to be a point where you get that aha moment, and then look at that, you're drawing. So try not to judge yourself. Participate in activities, even though we're pretty flexible. We're not going to be meeting live. There's still opportunities that we can all talk to one another and share our thoughts, which is pretty cool. So that is it. If you have any questions about this, you could always email me. That's really all there is with the rules of the class. It's there to make sure that you get the most out of the class and that you know that I'm always there for you. Again, I know that it can be really hard sometimes to draw something that you haven't really drawn before, or learning something that you may not necessarily have learned that way before. But just know that whatever you learn in this class isn't the end all of be all. It's just there as a guide, which means that you can modify it if you want. If there's a way that you want to change it, go right ahead. All I ask is that you follow along with the directions and then make it your own, because you're the artist. It's your canvas. I'm only here as a guide. So we're going to get started. So when you're thinking about your character, the first thing you want to do is add guidelines. Guidelines are your friend, particularly at the beginning when you're first learning to draw. So for an enemy character, I'm going to use a circle, and the circle is going to act like the skull of the head. So on my piece of paper, I want to draw really, really lightly. This right here is a handwriting. This is pretty dark. I want you to really light, very light when you start to do guidelines, because you want to have the ability to erase your guidelines later. So on my piece of paper, I'm going to start to draw a circle. I would refrain from actually tracing something. You can just draw a quick circle if you like, or if you see what I'm doing, I'm just kind of going around with little lines to create my circle. And again, you want to make sure that this is pretty light. So this acts almost like the blank skull. In my circle, I'm going to add a line right in the center, very lightly. And then I'm going to split my circle vertically. Once I'm done with that, we have a lollipop. Actually, no, we're going to add more guidelines. So underneath my guideline, I'm going in between that half horizon line, the horizon line, and then also that circle. I'm going to split it again in the middle. So what we got going on here, we have a guideline to help build faces. This is where the eyes will go. This is the eyebrow and hairline. This is the nose. The mouth will fall on this line, and then the chin will fall here. Now, the cool thing about faces is that you can pretty much measure out everything by your eye size. So throughout the class, you might see me say something like, do about a half eye or a whole eye. I'm using the guidelines for this area. It's a really cool way to just measure out proportionally your body and your face in this case. So that's a half. It just means I'm doing half an eye. If I say full eye, I'm just doing a full eye. And I will always remind you by kind of using some guidelines as we go along. Okay, so what about your eyes? When you're thinking about eyes, the hardest thing is to portion it out. Think about your eyes in the sense of you have two eyes that you can see, and one eye is invisible, and they're all about equal portions. So, drawing my character, I'm going to find the center of my right circle. And from there, I am going to draw a circle. Now, the circle is just a guideline, it's a portion of the eye, so we can see the whole character. Once I have that first guideline, I'm just going to take my lovely fingers, measure it out, bring it to the middle. That's going to give me my invisible eye. And then use my fingers to help guide the second eye. And then I'm going to draw it out. We're going to do a variety of different types of eyes. For this class, we're going to keep the eyes pretty basic. So you're going to see me use a little bit of a circular type of eye for our character. Let's think of the eye socket for your character. The next portion of a character is the nose. So when you're thinking about the nose is generally going to fall somewhere in this line. This is kind of where your nose socket is. Sometimes it might be a little in between the eyes, it might be a little further down. So for the case of this class, I'm going to make a little nose right in the center. Right in the center. So how do you find the center of your place? Maybe your line is a little crooked, and that happens to us all. I'm going to use my fingers. Wherever the centerpiece is, that's where my nose is going to be. We've got a little line there. And this is about a half eye away from the eye socket. So here's my eye, about a half eye away. The same thing goes with the mouth. You don't want the mouth to be so far down that it looks kind of droopy. So just think about your eye socket again and use about half eye. When you use half the eye, you bring it down, it's going to land you right around that circle area. So for this character, I'm going to say that for the most part, your mouth falls in between the eyes, falls along this line. So I am going to draw a nice little happy face along my line. So that is our first mouth. I'm just going to add a little bit of a line here. Once you have your face put down, it makes it a lot easier to draw the chin. So for your chin, you want to start just by thinking about where you want the chin to end. Generally, for characters, you want it to be about a half eye away from the mouth. You can have it a little bit longer. You can have it a tiny bit shorter, but the shorter it is, it may look like your character has no teeth. And the longer it is, your character might look a little bit old. So once I have that mark, I'm going to go back to my eyes. And on the side of my eyes, I want to make sure that they look a little bit even. So I'm going to look. Maybe I'll use my finger and I'll guide myself. This side looks like it's a little bit off, and that's okay. And that's going to be my first piece. That's going to be where my skull is. On your face, you have these jaw lines. Jaw lines generally start at the end of the eye. If you were to take your own eye and kind of draw down, you might feel a little curve near your jaw, right? Right, you go down, you feel your jaw, you feel that nice little curve hinge. That's where it really aligns with your eyes. I'm just going to take my pencil, bring it down, and bring it a little in between that mouth, a little past the circle. And then I'm going to take that dot that I have near the mouth and drag it all the way over, align it with the other mouth, the other eye. And that's going to help create my face. A dot to dot is a really good way to start drawing faces. There are other ways to draw faces, but this just helps to really practice your measurements. And as you go on, you may change it, the different styles, but I feel like this is a really good way to start. So now we have dot to dot. They're all look relatively in the where they should be. I'm going to start to draw the outline of my face. The faces can vary in the way that it's perceived. Sometimes they're round, sometimes they're square, sometimes they're long, sometimes they're short, sometimes they're skinny, sometimes they're fat. Just like people, faces and anime also change. So for this person, we'll give them a little bit of a rounder face. So what I'm going to do, for the side that I'm a little bit off, down with a little bit of a straight line to that first dot. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So they look pretty even. Go back and forth from dot to dot, just so that I make sure that I do everything the way I want it to be done. So as I get towards the eye, past the eye, I'm going to start to curve it in. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. As I get towards that eye, I'm going to go back and forth. I'm going to start to curve it in. So that gives you an idea of kind of where to put them out. Now you may notice that this one is a little bit too far in. How do you know? Well, look, do you see where it ends with the eye? That's too far in. And that's a simple, 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 easy fix. Just take your little eraser, erase the dot, align it with the eye, and that will help you to get the desired look. The reason why it's good to check it as you go along, and that was a good example of that, is because you don't want to have really skinny cheeks. So if you bring in that dot a little too much, your cheeks might not really exist. Now that I fixed it, I'm going to go back. I am going to connect it to my chin. So this is my chin. Now again, your chin can be a little bit rounder, it could be a little bit square. We're giving him a little bit of a square look today. When it comes to your neck always falls in between your eyes. It will vary by man and female, but for a generic type of character, I would say just keep it in between the eyes or aligned with the mouth. And generally, the neck is about the size of your eye area. Okay, so we got a good face going on here. Next, what I want to do is I want to add ears. Now, ears can be a little tricky depending on the age. The character might have smaller ears, they might have bigger ears. So for this character, we're going to keep them aligned with the eyes and nose. In general, ears will sit a little bit on the halfway mark, a little above the halfway mark, maybe a little bit below. So I'm going to take my little mark that I made on this right side, it's aligned with the nose, and bring it to the other side. I'm just going to add some ovals, nice half ovals for my ears. And a good way to measure it out is you can just take your pencil on both sides, measure it from the one you just drew, and add it to the other ones. Because you added the two dots that align by dragging your pencil over, you should get a pretty relative even ears. Next, what I want to do is I want to add some hair. So boys and girls, they have generally the same hairline, which makes it a lot easier. It's just a matter of styling at that point. So where does that fall? Get this. This eyes acts as a perfect gauge for that. This line in the middle acts as your skull, while this acts as the hair that you would find in front of your face, and this would act as the hair that you'd find behind. Our skulls are spheres, so to make it look as though your character is not bald, it gives your hair some volume. So I'm just gonna take my fingers to my guideline, bring it up to my hair, and this is going to give me a pretty good guideline. Again, you can go a tiny bit smaller, definitely go a little bit bigger, but for the most part, that's a really great way to add some guidelines. So where does the guidelines fall? On the inside of the hair, generally it starts to get a little bit smaller as you get to the ears. As you get to the midpoint, you might see a little bit of a curve. We all have this little bit of curve in front of our head. And then you might come back down on the other side. As you get closer to the ear, you start to taper it in. And that would be your sideburns. Everyone has these types of sideburns. The same thing goes along with the back of the head. So for now, I'm just gonna add a little bit of a heart right in the center. And I'm going to then take my pencil. I'm just gonna start to follow along the head. And we'll go through a little bit about here and how to style it. But for now, we're gonna say that here can generally stop about mid-ear. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different, but this is just a very good guideline when you start to kind of think about your hair. The next thing to think about is your eyebrows. So for your eyebrows, again, depending on the expression, it will change, it will go back and forth. So I'm just gonna take the half eye and I'm gonna bring it up. Your eyebrows generally follow your eyelid. So I'm just gonna take my pencil and I'm just gonna follow the little guideline I have for the eye on one side, make a little happy, a little bit of a rainbow or an arch. And then I'm going to take my pencil from that beginning of my arch eyebrow and drag it over. Do the same. Girls have a little bit of a smaller eyebrow, while boys will have a little bit of a bushier eyebrow. So keep that in mind while you are drawing. Pretty good template for a face. It's a really basic face. The next step of what we're going to do is we are going to fill this in so that you'll have kind of a little bit of a style to your face. Again, I would hold on to this, keep it aside, and next step is to just decorate it. So here we go. Okay, so now we did our basic outline for a girl, boy. It could be either way. Just to kind of show you what you could do with that outline, we're going to draw on top of it. I would recommend having it set aside, the one that's in the classroom, so that you can go back to it and use it as that guideline, especially for this week, because I really would love for you to try different characters based on what we did in class. And then next week, we're going to draw a girl, and then the following week, we're going to draw a boy, and again, progressively go lower until we have a full-on body. So let's get started. So as you can see, we have our girl and she really needs a face. She desperately needs a face. Most of her, it's pretty done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my putty eraser and I am going to just lightly erase above it. I want you to be able to see the lines, but I also don't want it to be too muddy. So I'm just taking this lovely putty eraser that I mentioned before and just lightly, very lightly. I still want you to see the guidelines for your face. I'm also going to use a darker pencil as well. I was using a 3H pencil. This was a little hard to erase, so I wouldn't recommend it for your first type of lead or granite. I would just recommend a regular number 2. For me, it's a very nice hard pencil to start with your guidelines. But again, number 2 mechanical works well if in fact erases a little bit better. So there you go. So there is my outline. So I'm just going to take my number 2 pencil and I'm going to just add a little bit of guidelines to her face. So I'm going to start with the eyes. I'm going to make her eyes look more like a My Hero type of character, very round. Again, when you're drawing this, you can erase once you start these little guidelines as we go along. So let's do this. The first thing I want to do is I want to draw the eyelids. Again, remember that when you're drawing, that you are taking it from the middle portion of your face. And what we're going to do is we're going to start maybe like 1/4 of the way on our circle to about the end of the circle on the outside. So what does that look like? I'm going to go back and forth just a little bit. And I'm going to add a little bit of a darker layer to the outside. But I'm not going to go too crazy. Just going to add a little bit of a dark layer to kind of give her a little bit more substance. Now to match the eyes a little bit better, what you can do is you can take your pencil from one side of your So the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to take my pencil from that eyebrow that I just created. Well, that's not really an eyebrow, right? That would be kind of funny if it was around your eye, that your eyelid. I'm going to take the beginning part of my eyelid and I'm just going to drag it over with an invisible line to my second eye. So this is going to give me relative to make them a little bit more even. And I am just going to go all the way up and around, following along my circle. Now for the irises, typically for a character, your eyes would be in between this half. You might see an older character with half this eye distance. You might see a younger character with the full eye distance. And that's what we're kind of doing today. We're doing a little bit of a younger character. And so age is important when it comes to, if you're wondering why your character looks a little bit old, maybe the eyes are a little too small, or maybe the chin's a little too wide. Just keep that in mind while you're drawing. So let's get back to her. I'm going to find the middle portion of my right eye. I'm going to drag it down and I'm just going to make a nice little arch. I'm going to take that arch and I'm going to take my lovely pencil and I'm going to drag it over to the other eye and I'm going to make it match up. Here's my eye, I drag it over. I can also use my pencil. It looks like it's a little the size of my pen cap to help kind of make sure that they stay relatively even. And I'm gonna go back and forth. It's always better to not just draw one eye all at once, because what would happen if you kind of messed up per se on your drawing? It would be really hard to kind of erase the whole eye. So it's better to kind of just go back and forth, just piecemealing or just adding little tiny details. And then if you decide, well, I don't really like that little piece of detail I just put, you can always erase it. So I'm going to add the sides of her eye right down. Almost that lovely light line that we have for the other side of the circle. So at this point, if you wanted to, you could also erase the little lines around the eyes that we don't need, which are on the inside. And of course, I'm going to keep a little bit of an outline so that you can see it, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to make this one a little bit less. Remember just to try to go a little bit lighter with your pencil, particularly when you are adding a little bit of finance and details. Okay, so let's go back to these eyes. Generally, for girls, there's more glare. For boys, there's less glare. The eyes are much more rounder on a girl than on a boy. But again, we are doing a child, so the child is going to be kind of both between a boy and a girl. There's really hard to kind of tell the difference until about the age of 12, and then you start to see, you know, kids become kids. And then, well, you get to see teens become teens just because of body changes at that point. So let's start with adding a little bit of an oval for a pupil. I'm going to make the pupil pretty big. I'm actually not going to shade in my pupil. I'm going to keep it pretty open just to add that glare to her eye. And then I'm going to take my pencil from the top of that lovely pupil that I just created, and I'm going to drag it over, measure it up, and do the same on the other side. Maybe this side of her eyes a little bit off, so I'm just going to take my lovely putty eraser and make it a little bit lighter. Once I'm done with adding these really weird looking guys at the moment, I'm gonna add a little glare at the top right-hand corner. And it's just a little oval that sits on its side about halfway on either side of my iris. I'm going to add, maybe I'll add a little bit of a dark color for the pupil, changing my mind. Then next, I'm going to use what's called hatch lines. And hatch lines are these little lines that kind of parallel each other. I'm going to take about a medium gray, which looks a little bit like that color. And I am going to start to add little hatch lines inside her iris. And then I'm going to add a little bit of a scribbly, a light gray on the top part of her. The top half is going to have this nice light scribbly gray. Of course, if you want to color it, totally okay at this point. Okay, so now we have the S pretty good. So let's move on to something else and we can add a little bit more details. I think what I'm going to do now, just to have her have some eyelashes, I'm going to make 2 little eyelashes that sit right where her pupil begins on both sides. 2 little happy faces on both sides. And there's no right or wrong with this. If you want to give her a little bit more eyelashes, go right ahead. The very top of the eye, I'm going to add what's going to look like a little hood. And this is just the hood part of her eye. We all have this. So it keeps our eye looking like it's in a socket. So very, very lightly, much lighter than the actual eye lid itself. Next, we're going to work a little bit on her lovely eyebrows. So for the eyebrows, I'm going to just add what's going to look like a little bit of a half quarter moon, a nice little arch. Again, a lot of female characters may not necessarily have a lot of eyebrows, but some do. If this was a boy version, chances are that her eyebrow would be much, much thicker. It would look a little bit like that. That would what the difference would be. Next, I'm going to work a little bit with the nose. So for the nose, I want to just add a little bit more style to it. She has kind of like a happy face for the nose. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of a shadow right underneath that nose. And very, very light scribble. Very, very light scribble. Right underneath that nose. And then maybe I'll add a little bit of a hatch line kind of going on the top. It's a tiny one. Again, this is very optional. Sometimes it's fun to have a little bit of style onto your nose. Every character is going to be a tiny bit different. I'm going to outline that eye a little bit more. Also going to erase a little bit more of that guideline. Now for her lips, I'm not going to keep her mouth this big. It's there for style purposes. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to lay in her mouth just a tiny bit. So you will see a little bit of remnants on her mouth. And I'm going to give her a little bit of a happy face. So underneath the nose, right next to where her mouth would be, I am going to draw what's going to first look like a sad face. And if you're thinking, well, how do I find that? Well, we have the circle, which is perfect, but you also have your eye length. So your eye length can give you, again, right where your mouth should be. Because her mouth is a little bit open, I'm just going to go a little bit higher. It looks like she has a mustache now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a nice little happy face right underneath the little sad face I created. Again, you can always erase that little line if you're not drawing on top of her. I'm awesome. I am. I'm gonna erase that little line. So typically with mouths, you could always not add any details to the mouth. You can keep it open like this, and this would be totally fine. If you wanted to add a little bit more details, you could always add teeth, which would look a little bit like a boat sitting on the top of her mouth. You could also add a little bit of a triangle on either side, give her a little bit, it looks like a tongue. And then go back to the outside of the mouth. And what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit darker outside of that little piece towards the bottom. This will give it a more of an anime look. So I'm just going to go back. Let's outline. Come out. Finally, I'm going to go back to the eyes. And I'm going to add little tiny eyelashes right underneath that eye, just sitting right on that line. So how are you doing so far? Hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully you're stopping and starting and saying, wow, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And I can't wait to see what your characters would look like. So we're going to work a little bit on the hair. And so for the hair, I'm just going to keep it, I'm going to keep it relatively short. It's going to be relatively long. Again, girls and boys have this very similar hair outline. So if you have a boy, you would still use this outline. If a girl, you would still use this outline. So what I'm going to do for her, I am going to go back to the very top and right on this line here, I'm going to just draw a nice little heart shape. I'm going to have her hair come down around her face. And we'll talk a little bit more about hair, but when you have hair, there's a couple of things that are in play. Gravity, shape of the face, also just the segments. Just like your eyes and your face, it's better to work in segments than to draw one side and then draw the other side, because you don't want this to happen. So you drew your hair way too close to the skull, and then you added a whole bunch of hair, and then you realized, oh, I didn't want to do that. If you kind of give yourself a little bit of space, drawing a little bit of segment, you may realize, oh, well, maybe the back is a little bit too high, so I'll bring it down. Or maybe I've decided that I'm just going to make it curly. It gives you a little bit more opportunity when you work in segment. Okay, so now we have our little heart on our lovely little head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on this left side, and I'm going to just draw a nice little line coming all the way down, a little over her ear, and down in front of her face. And do the same thing on the other side. It's going to draw a nice little line coming all the way down, a little over her ear, and then down around her face. So the back of the head is always going to be a little bit darker, and it's going to have a little bit more filling to it. So we're going to work on the back of the head now, because we have pretty much what we need to segment it. So what I like to do is I like to take my pencil and lightly add a arch around the neck. It'll just make sure that your hair is kind of following along what it would look like if you were on a sphere. And then next, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take my pencil and just add little lines coming down. Right underneath. I'm not shading it just yet, because I want to be able to go back if I need to fix anything. Okay, so now we got the back of the head, we got the side of the front of the head, and now we're going to do this skull area. So for the skull area, again, we're going to go long with her hair, and I'm going to start by making an additional little heart, and I'm going to follow the guy line. So a lot of things that happen sometimes is that we do make these little bumps in our head. Because of the guidelines that's above the skull, you can just follow the guideline and you should be fine. So what does that mean? I'm just going to go around following my guideline. Maybe I'll add a little bit more hair around the ear and then bring it down. Just adding a nice line. You can also add a little bit of wave if you like, but you really just want to follow your skull. I'm going to add a little piece of hair here. Maybe add another little segment kind of coming off of her head. It's always fun because after you have finished just the main portion, you can always go back and add a little bit more as well. Maybe I'll add another little piece kind of hanging out in this section. So the next step after you've done majority of your hair is to go back and see if you need to erase anything. For instance, this ear, this can go. I don't need this ear anymore. Ear, I can erase this little piece of ear segment as well. You'll start to see your hair a little bit better once you start to erase a lot of those lines. After I'm done, I'm going to go way back to the top of her head, and I'm going to add little lines kind of pointing up. This is the inside of her head. This is what you will see underneath her hair. Then I'm going to come to the outside of my lovely hair in front of my face, and I'm going to add a little bit of a line, not starting at the very top, but a little bit on the side. Make sure that it looks somewhat uneven. And add a little line down. This is going to make sense to the person who is looking at your character. You can kind of see how the hair is traveling. You don't need to add a whole lot of lines, just a little bit of lines will do you a lot of fun justice. You could also add little pieces of hair in front of her face if you like, just add little tiny strands kind of coming down. But the next thing to do is just shade it in. So when you're going to shade, I would start with the areas that are going to be a little bit on the, wherever there's like a little bit of an attachment. So attachment shadows are really important when it comes to shading in your characters here. And light is also a factor, but when you're starting, understanding that if an object touches a shadow will help. And let's see how that would look like. Let's start with her hair. So around the back of her head, she has all of these strands of hair. So I'm just going to take my pencil and pointing down, I'm going to lightly add some wispy hair. These little lines that go bow, 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 all the way around her ear. This will just help me see the front versus the back. I'm going to go back and I'm just going to add a little bit of a darker layer, a little closer to the ear and around her head, because again, these are attachment shadows. Hair is pretty unique in the sense that it has multiple shadows, has multiple highlights. There's a lot you can do with hair. So once I am done with adding that back shadow, go back and just maybe make it softer a little bit. I'm going to work with the outside of the hair. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at it. I'm going to say, well, okay, what do I need to do to make it look as though it's on top of her head? The first thing I'm going to do is this little piece of hair is definitely in front of the hair that's in the back. So I'm just going to add a tiny, tiny little bit of a wispy shadow down in front, in the back of that little line. And then I'm going to just take my pencil and just add little tiny lines kind of coming towards the bottom of the hair just to close it off. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This piece of hair is definitely in the back. Others hair, so I'm just going to make it nice and wispy. And if your line just happens to get a little smudgy, no worries. You can just take your lovely putty eraser if you have one and just clean it up, or a stump would also work really well with that as well. So you're going to go back and it's kind of like a beautiful road map, try to figure out what pieces of hair are going to be in the front and what pieces of hair are in the back. So again, I'm just adding a nice light shade in some of this hair. And once I'm done, I can always go back and I can make little pieces of hair the main segment by making them a little bit darker, particularly on the outside of the hair. Again, this is a comic, so we want to make it still have that cartoon quality. Just adding a nice little like line. It's a little darker than the hair itself. That's also very important, say in front of the hair as well. You want it to really stick out, so you may add a little bit of a darker line. You don't want to add too many. You don't want it to look too cluttered, but you also don't want it to look too jagged at the same time. You just want to have a little bit of fun with the hair. If you did a different hair, I would totally love to see it. And once you're done with adding the little bits of hair that you need, I'm gonna take my stump and I'm gonna add one little types of shadows around the face, starting with the neck. We don't want our neck to look like it's in our chin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little tiny stump. And if you need a little bit more color, you could also use your pencil and add a little bit of a little tiny bit of a swirly shade. Just a little tiny scribbly shade just to give her neck a little bit more depth. And then I'm going to take my stump and around her hairline, I'm going to do the same. So very, very lightly, I'm just going to shade in where her hair is touching her face. And this is again that attachment shadow. I'm also going to shade in little pieces of the ears that are sticking out. Attachment shadows are awesome. You can add so much to your character, even if you're not quite sure about light direction or where to even place like a shadow if you are standing in the light. Attachment shadows make the character look as though everything belongs together. I'm going back and I'm just darkening a little piece of face that I kind of smudged out a tiny bit. You can also add, with your stump, you could also add a little bit of color around her cheek area, just going back and forth, around and around and around and around. Same thing on the other one side, around and around and around and around. And you get this wonderful little cheeky color. So from the basic outline, we have a girl. And this is just a very basic. I would challenge you to try to draw that outline that we did at the beginning of class as a boy. How would that come out? So that is it for the class. And I hope that you enjoyed the girl that you've drawn. I can't wait to see it. I really do want to see it. I love looking at art. And that doesn't just include the girl that we draw in class. If you're during the week, you've drawn something else, or you watched a show that was really cool and you want to share it with the classroom, go right ahead. That's what this class is about. So until next time, I hope you have an awesome, awesome, most awesome, let me say how many times I can say awesome week this week. All right. Bye, everybody.